Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm classy now because I've got a cup with tea in it. Yes. Hello and welcome. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM with another OGGM tip. We haven't done any GM tips in a while. Thought we'd toss out a few more because why not? It's not like I know what I'm talking about or I think I'm a better game master than you, though I am. No, really. It's just that I have a lot of experience and I have an unusual way of observing things even when I'm involved in them. So it sometimes gives me a good perspective that sometimes, especially beginning GMs, might be able to gain some level of something or another from what I'm saying. Usually it's something that bothers me, and I feel like, well, if I talk about it, maybe it won't happen anymore, because maybe there's other people who are bothered by it, but they don't have the whatever to say, hey, you know what, I thought what you did last night was really stupid, Bob the DM, and maybe it's something you shouldn't happen again. I don't know. Because DMs are not infallible. DMs make mistakes. And one mistake, amongst the many, because we're only human, and we're only stupid, is never assume your players know what you're talking about. When I was studying creative writing and filmmaking, because I am a published working screenwriter, one of the best pieces of advice my creative writing screenwriting professor gave me was, 1, how long should it be? As long as it needs to be to say what you need to say. And 2, more importantly, never assume your audience knows what you're talking about. Now, in terms of gaming, this is an unusual precipice because as a DM, you sometimes want to be in that position where they don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes it's better to describe something than it is to say what it is, because our brains will fill in the blocks. And often what our brains imagine is way better or way scarier or way more exciting than what you actually said. Case in point, my story about the cow, which I've related before and will probably relate it again, which is a scenario where by describing something, instead of saying what it actually was, you see a cow, freaked out for, full-on adults thinking that what we were encountering was some horrible monster, and it just turned out it was a cow lost in the dark. So that was a case of, by not telling the players what it was, we made the assumptions, and the assumptions were way worse than it actually was, and that was a lot of fun. And in that case, it's okay to not let the players actually know. But in the case of running something like, say, Star Wars, because most of us have seen Star Wars. There are several Star Wars role-playing games. A lot of us have played in Star Wars role-playing games, and it's something we all generally have an idea. So if I say Star Wars, you probably know what I'm talking about. Suppose if I say Ravenlore, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. Probably there's 3 people on the planet who've ever heard of Ravenlore. Okay, so let's say you're running a Star Wars game. You as the DM assume that, well, I'm running Star Wars, everybody's seen Star Wars, so if I mention Star Wars stuff, they're gonna know what I'm talking about, right? No, that is not always true. Recently, I was in a scenario where the DM assumed that the players knew what he was talking about. He referenced something that he knew very well, and let's say it was Star Wars. And because of that, he made the assumption that the players knew what he was talking about. So when he referenced places, names, encounters with recognizable NPCs from the, let's say, Star Wars milieu, the assumption was, well, you know what the fuck I'm talking about, so I don't have to explain it. Except in this case, no. I think maybe one other person was as deep into the lore as the DM, so when the DM referenced a location or a phrase or an individual, that he knew what he was talking about, and the other player knew what he was talking about, but 6 other players were like, where are we? What is this place? Why is this important? You keep saying this, so it must be important, but I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So in that case, it is wrong to assume your players know what you're talking about. In that case, as long as you need to say what you need to say, is very important. Because if you're running, say, Star Wars, Middle-earth, the Marvel Universe, Wizard of Oz, I don't know what else, Batman, what you think you know about Star Wars and what they think they know about Star Wars might not be the same thing. So it's a dangerous, interesting gap. Because over here you have I don't want them to know what it is because it's way more exciting for them to fill in the gaps in their imagination than for me to tell them, oh, it's a +1 sword, or, oh, it's a skeleton. But then over here you have we don't know what you're talking about when you reference the block on Mos Eisley's where Dig Partuo once picked up a very important Jedi holocron in a very obscure Star Wars comic book that none of us but you, have read. So I don't know who that is. I don't know why that's important, and I don't know why you keep mentioning this piece of lore, because I don't know what you're talking about. So, yeah, but that is a case of don't assume they know what you're talking about, especially in relation to things like lore and places, especially if it's hard enough running a world that's pre-built like Star Wars. It's even harder running a world that you've made up. And then you're referring to lore that, I don't know what you're talking about because you made this up and you haven't told us what this is. So great. You have 150 pages of lore for your world, but I don't know who this guy on the green horse is or why it's important. Should I be frightened? Is he important to the lore? You keep talking about this city. You brought it up like 37 times, so I guess it's important. But since I don't know the lore of your world, why is it important? Are you telling me to go there? 9. So yeah, again, 1, never assume they know what you're talking about, especially when it comes to world lore. But on the other hand, it's sometimes okay for them to not know what you're talking about when you're describing a scene. When you're describing a monster, when you're describing a treasure, when you're describing a dungeon, when you're describing a trap, you want some blanks for their imagination to fill in, because that's going to always be way more exciting, way more funny, way more cool, or way more scarier than what you say. If I just say, you see a skeleton, but if I describe the skeleton in the most visceral, detailed, horrific way I can, their imagination is going to fill in the blanks and make it something way worse than just a skeleton. On the other hand, if you're referencing some town from a world you built and a lore that you've developed that they do not know because they have not read your lore and you have not bothered to explain it to them why this town is so important, then chances are that they don't know what you're talking about. And they're either not going to pay attention, they're going to tune out, or they're going to feel like stupid because that feeling of I don't know what you're talking about. You're referencing pop culture, or you're referencing something, or you're referencing some obscure chapter from Star Wars, or you're referencing something from your world, but you're assuming I know what you're talking about. And if I don't know what you're talking about and you're making it sound like, that's important, I'm not sure how to respond. Do I respond like, now I feel stupid because I don't know what you're talking about? Is this something I should have known? Why don't I know this? Or you feel like, you didn't bother telling me about this, so I don't fucking care because it's not important, because if it was important, you would have told me about it. So I'm just going to do what I was going to do anyways, and I'm sorry if you spent 6 hours designing a scenario based upon us going to this town you keep referencing, but you haven't made it important, and that's not what I want to do, and why would I want to go there? And I'm drinking tea. So there you go. Every now and then I like to toss out a little DM tip. Doesn't mean I'm the best DM in the world. Doesn't mean I think what I'm knowing that I'm talking about is way more important than what you're talking about. But occasionally my perspective and experience allows me to percolate these ideas onto your heads. And hopefully you take something from it. And the something I want you to take from today's little DM tip before we wrap it up is in referencing to lore, whether it's a world you built on your own or you're using a pre-established world like Star Wars or Marvel or whatever. Don't assume they know what you're talking about if they don't know the lore. So make sure the lore that you want them to know, if it's important to the story, they know. Put it on a Facebook page, print it out and give it to them, talk about it, in the session 0, whatever. If it's important to the story, they should have some general idea of what is going on, especially if it's something you built yourself, or even if it's not something you built yourself, even if you're playing in the Marvel Universe. Don't assume everybody knows everything about the Marvel Universe. Okay, I'll talk to you later.